question period in the Alberta Legislature. My name is David, Speaker of the House. Currently, the House is busy working its way through the budget estimates, and at the moment, 10 departments have been discussed to some degree. Later this morning, after question period, the House will be discussing the budgetary estimates of the Department of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs.
Let us pray. Our Divine Father, as we conclude for this week our work in this assembly, we renew our thanks and ask that we may continue our work under your guidance. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce a bill, Bill 21, the Employment Standards Code.
The Honourable Minister of Labour has moved first reading of Bill 21, Employment Standards Code. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 21, Employment Standards Code, introduced by the Honourable Dr. Reid, is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I further request leave to introduce a bill, Bill 22, the Labour Relations Code. Mr. Speaker, these two bills represent the end point of an almost unbelievable consultation process between Albertans. The intent is that we will be introducing the concept of fairness and equity in the relationship between employees and employers, and it will be to the benefit of all Albertans.
Honourable members, it is not the custom of the House to be making interruptions at the introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Labour has moved first reading of Bill 22, Labour Relations Code. Those in favour of first reading, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, please say no. So ordered.
Bill number 22, Labour Relations Code, introduced by the Honourable Dr. Reid, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Speaker, I'd like to table a document prepared by the Amalgamated Transit Union, Local 569 of Edmonton and Local 583 in Calgary. Transit Union is making a case, Mr. Speaker, for amending seatbelt legislation to exempt city bus drivers from wearing lap belts. This would be in keeping with legislation in other provinces, Mr. Speaker, and the document is supported by over 1,300 signatures of members of these unions.
The Chair will examine whether it's tabling or a petition. Thank you. Member, Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I take pleasure in tabling today the annual report, the first annual report of the Alberta Advisory Council on Women's Issues, covering the period from November 13, 1986 to March 31, 1987.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Premier.
I'm extremely pleased today to introduce to you and through you to the House Mr. Gary McPherson. He's in the members' gallery. Gary has accepted my offer to be the first chairman of the Premier's Council on the status of persons with disabilities. Gary's a leader among disabled in Alberta, and he's a leader among Albertans because of the person that he is. Gary chaired the Rick Hansen Man in Motion tour in our province. He was with me when I made the commitment and promise to Rick Hansen that we would have a Premier's Council on persons with disabilities in this province. As you know, Mr. Speaker, we introduced that bill as Bill number 1 in this session. We're extremely fortunate as a province to have a person like Gary who would take on the chairmanship of this council. I'd ask all members to join with me in acknowledging his commitment and welcoming him here in the legislature.
Member for Edmonton Belmont, followed by Calgary Fish Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure today to introduce to you and through you some 25 grade 5 students from St. Vladimir School from Edmonton Belmont. They're accompanied today by their teacher, Dr. Kathy Garvey, and a school aide, Mrs. Crystal Kozluzniak. They're seated in the public gallery. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask that they rise and receive the traditional welcome of the Assembly.
Calgary Fish Creek, followed by Stony Plain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With us today in the public gallery is a group of young men from the 142nd Boy Scout Troop. These young men reside in the Bonavista and Queensland communities in the Calgary Fish Creek constituency. They're accompanied today by their leaders, Mike Lee and Dean Selk, and I'd ask them now to stand and receive the traditional welcome of the Assembly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce to you and through you to the honourable members of this Assembly 74 bright and cheery grade 6 students from the Spruce Grove Brookwood Elementary School. They are accompanied by their teachers, Mrs. Darlene Arnold, Mrs. Beth Willett, Mr. Ray Shapka, and parents Mrs. Duncan, Mrs. Andres, and Mrs. Phillips. I ask that they stand and receive the warmest welcome of this Assembly.
Edmonton Calder.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure this morning to introduce 26 grade 8 students from the Sir John Thompson School in the constituency of Calder. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Bob Kruzak. They are situated in they're seated in the members' public gallery, and I would ask that they stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, to the Treasurer. Mr. Speaker, the Mulroney government in Ottawa is following a policy course which is further integrating the economies of Canada and the United States. Mr. Speaker, and as we move to interlock our economies, it will be inevitable under the Mulroney trade deal that our Canadian dollar will rise closer to the American dollar. Mr. Speaker, this morning, one result is that our currency is rising, as the Treasurer is well aware, even this morning, closer to the U.S. dollar. My question, though, to the Treasurer is this. What action has the government taken, the Alberta government taken, to impress upon the federal government the need for an independent fiscal and monetary policy, especially in view of the threat to Alberta of high monetary rates?
Mr. Speaker, I think the general tone of this question, to some extent, was in part responded to, and I appreciate the opportunity for further stating Alberta's position with respect to Canadian dollar cross-currency rate, in particular the United States dollar. The question of monetary policy in Canada is, as the member points out, always one of a continuing refinement and definition, and I must say that from time to time, going back to I guess the early 1980s, the province of Alberta has taken an aggressive position in attempting to persuade the central government and the Minister of Finance that in fact the Canadian dollar should maintain a relatively low position against the United States dollar. And of course, the contrast and the obvious problem that the central bank must face is one of protecting Canadians generally against inflation. And I understand the problem that they're facing with respect to that balance. That is a balance which drives the long-term treasuries up to a high yield, as you now see in Canada, which attracts dollars into Canada and protects the dollar. But at the same time, takes on the question of inflation. From the province's point of view, Mr. Speaker, we have indicated clearly that we would like to maintain the kind of ratio between the Canadian dollar and U.S. dollar that we saw, say, in 1987. And that obviously provides and affords Canadians and Alberta in particular an opportunity to trade fairly aggressively with our export commodities into the United States. Now, whether or not the free trade arrangement will impact on the Canadian dollar to the extent that the honourable member suggests, I would draw his attention to the recent study by the Conference Board, which indicates, on balance, that you may see a 2 or 3 cent increase in the Canadian dollar against the U.S. dollar over the next few years, as in fact the economies come into competitive harmony with one in each other. That is to say, that.
Thank you. We look forward to the supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, 2 to 3 cents, I might point out, today, I'm sure the Treasurer is aware, it's over 81 cents, even today, to the Treasurer, Mr. Speaker. And I want to just follow up. Is the Treasurer saying that as we interlock our economies, that the Mulroney trade deal is not going to have an impact on the dollar, that that dollar will not rise more than 2 or 3 cents? Is that what the Treasurer is telling this Assembly?
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, we are forecasting here what will happen. Let's as I tried to point out last time this question was raised, that when you get into the free trade arrangements, the battle of the treasuries between the provinces will end. And that means that the subsidies which are now in place, particularly in agricultural products, will likely be removed over that period. That means that each commodity and each province becomes competitively strong. And we start to focus in on those areas where we can maintain our position in foreign markets. And that's the heart and the substance of the free trade arrangement. And that gives Alberta a great opportunity to compete into those world markets. As I said before, this is our agenda. We want this to happen because we need the markets for agricultural exports, for hydrocarbons, oil and gas in particular, for petrochemicals. And we believe that over a period of time, we will be able to bring into this province, by way of diversification, building on the strengths that are here, a great opportunity for us to be competitive in those U.S. markets. And that's the intention, and that's the outcome. With respect to the currency, Mr. Speaker, I can only give the most recent information that I have, and that's a study done by an independent group which suggests to us that perhaps the dollar may increase in their assessment and their model by 2 or 3 cents. Now, it's a matter of judgment whether that would change the competitive advantage which Alberta now has. Personally, I don't think it will. However, Mr. Speaker, in the meantime, as the Premier and Mr. Bourassa have pointed out, we will continue to bring pressure against the central bank to let the dollar float down, to let the interest rates move down as well, so that we can have a lower Canadian dollar in the meantime relative to U.S. dollar. And in the Forex markets, I agree today because of the two facts that happened in the U.S. economy yesterday, Mr. Speaker. The trade account was $13.2 billion, and in fact today the fundamental production shows a touch of inflation. And that's why the market has been off, and that's why the long-term treasuries are up. American bellwether treasuries are at their second highest level, but the market has fallen, Mr. Speaker, the fifth largest drop in the market. This is an uncertain period, Mr. Speaker. When that sorts out.
Thank you, Honourable. Here we go.
Mr. Speaker, what we have here is a lot of wishful and selective thinking, Mr. Speaker, and the point is the pressures are on to move the dollar up. The Premier and Bourassa can talk about all they want, but today it's up over 81 cents. And my question is, another aspect of the Treasurer's admitted that hurts our provincial revenues, is the Treasurer not also does he agree that also the rising Canadian dollar will negatively, severely negatively affect our capital projects in this province?
I would have to think about the capital. I presume you're talking about capital investments, Mr. Speaker. I don't think the Canadian dollar will be negatively impacted by the marginal changes. That is to say, the capital investment decision will be marginally affected by the current rate of the Canadian dollar. I think what would happen, Mr. Speaker, is if the interest rates go high and higher as a result of inflation or as a result of a central bank policy, that might, to some extent, defer some major capital investment decisions. Yet, the ones that are significant to Alberta, the massive investment in forestry, the continuing investment in oil and gas sector, are probably being driven by other items in the interest rate. And in fact, those decisions have been made, the financing is in place, and those projects will proceed. Where you do find the difficulty and where we have the sense of sympathy ourselves is in the new construction of homes, because, of course, the new construction of homes is, in fact, driven to great extent by the mortgage rate. But let's be sure, Mr. Speaker, I don't think any one of us here really feels any better or any worse as a result of the Canadian dollar moving from 80.3 cents to 80.78 cents. I mean, it's not that kind of a dramatic change. Should the dollar break through the 81-cent level on a sustainable period, I think you'll see the Premier knocking on the door of Mr. Bowie and give him some good advice.
Well, sure, Mr. Bowie's in trepidation, I'm sure, Mr. Speaker. My question, though, to come back, Mr. Speaker, is the Treasurer surely aware that Imperial Oil has cited the higher Canadian dollar as a reason for not expanding. They're started at $60 million in the Cold Lake program. They've given that as a reason. And my question to the Treasurer, flowing from that, is the Treasurer standing, as he did in the last question, saying that oil and gas projects or any capital investment like this is not affected by a rising Canadian dollar? Is that what he's trying to tell us?
Speaker, what I'm trying to tell the member, and I think what the Minister of Energy told him yesterday, is that in his view, the investment in oil and gas in this province will increase, in his estimate, up to 20%. Now, that's a very strong investment profile, Mr. Speaker, for this province. And we can pick one or two items where there has been new considerations given to investment decisions. That's how the private sector works, by the way. They look at the investment, they make their calculations based on the rate of return. But we can say, without any fear at all, that given the royalty regime, given the sustained price of oil and gas in this province, and given the fact that the Western Sedimentary Basin, essentially located in Alberta, is the best play in the world, you will see the oil and gas sector strong and buoyant, and as the Minister said, new investment coming to this province.
Calgary Northwest, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Yes, Mr. Speaker. To the Treasurer, I think we're all aware of the impact on the American-Canadian dollar on our raw products, but I was wondering if the Treasurer would comment on the impact of the protectionist measures and our labor costs in our finished product going into that U.S. market that consumes 85% of our exports.
That's right. Well, now there is an astute question, Mr. Speaker. There's a question which reflects the long-term benefits to Alberta because, of course, when you remove the subsidies and the protectionist spirit which has existed in the United States to some extent, then our products will not suffer the same kind of restrictions that we have seen over the past 2 years. Pork, for example, lumber more specifically, those have been difficult areas for us. We get these barriers removed, Mr. Speaker, we'll be able to compete aggressively, expand our markets, and more jobs here. What has happened, Mr. Speaker, is the member from Norwood does not want to have new jobs generated in this province. He wants them downstream somewhere, in Ontario, perhaps.
Westlock Sturgeon, supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, as to supplementary to the Treasurer, the past, or immediate past, Premier Mr. Lougheed has been quoted as saying that if the dollar continues to rise, that we'd have to stop the free trade deal. Has he set a number in his mind to which the Canadian dollar will rise when he would turn around and recommend to his Premier, instead of talking hooey to Mr. Bowie, that they would cancel the free trade agreement?
Well, Mr. Speaker, first of all, I made the mistake, Mr. Speaker. The Governor of the Bank of Canada is Mr. Crow. We lived under the Bowie regime for quite a considerable period that he tends to become synonymous with a strong central bank policy. Mr. Speaker, I can't agree that our former Premier, Mr. Lougheed, made any comment of that order. I think it would be inappropriate to suggest that is his view. We are all concerned, as I've tried to display, that in fact the current cross-currency rate with the United States, on the short term at least, is a major problem for us. We're attempting to deal with it. We have a strong policy with respect to advising Mr. Wilson, advising the Prime Minister on behalf of the Premier, and dealing with Mr. Crow, as I have done personally, that interest rates are a significant impact on our economy. Let the dollar trend down to a lower level so we can compete in the world markets in the midpoint, and that's the essential framework of the policy which we are sustaining.
Thank you. Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to designate my second question, the member from Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, my question today is to the Minister for Immigration and Career Development. At their 1986 annual convention, the Alberta Cultural Heritage Council called for government action to further the employment and advancement opportunities of visible minorities in the province, in the public service of Alberta and in the private sector. My question to the Minister is, since almost 2 years now have gone by without a serious response from the government to this resolution, Will the minister commit himself today to implementing some kind of a program that will identify and reduce the employment obstacles that are faced by visible minority group members in this province?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I am well aware of the resolution, and as I indicated to the individuals presenting the resolution at the time, that if there are impediments to advancement in the civil service within the province of Alberta for visible minorities, that I would hope that they would take it up through the Individual Rights Protection Act.
Is that the department that had an 8% cut this year, Mr. Speaker? Second question maybe to the minister involved. He's identified in previous and other programs employment obstacles that need addressing by Native groups, by women and others. Why is the minister stalling on this particular area? He knows there are problems facing visible minorities in terms of employment access in the public service and elsewhere. Why don't you address that particular area of difficulty, Mr. Minister?
Mr. Speaker, I am addressing the issue, and we on an ongoing basis do address the issue, and certainly the Minister for Labour, who's responsible for the Public Service Commission, may wish to respond, but I should point out to the honourable member that on a regular basis we are reviewing the needs and concerns of the ethnic communities in the province of Alberta. The member will recall in my estimates last year I referred to the Immigration and Settlement Services Advisory Committee that is made up of 10 Albertans from across Alberta representing basically visible minorities in this province to advise me on matters that are particular to immigration but relate in general to the ethnic community in the province of Alberta. Also might point out, Mr. Speaker, that the Premier has appointed an individual from the ethnic community to liaise directly with him to deal with the concerns of ethnic minorities finding their way through government.
Mr. Speaker, since the federal government has introduced a visible minority employment program and the City of Calgary has done similar action, can the minister tell the ethnocultural communities of this province how much longer they're going to have to put up with foot dragging from the province in this area?
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member is in touch with the ethnic communities in this province, he'll know that neither I nor members of this government are foot dragging on any issues that materially affect them.
Well, they're embedded in some
As a very minimum, can the minister assure the visible minority groups of the province of Alberta that he will undertake some sort of a survey to identify just exactly what extent of difficulty of access they are facing in the province of Alberta, particularly with the public sector, but as well with the wider private sector as well?
Mr. Speaker, as I indicated, if there are individuals that feel there are impediments to advancement, whether it be in the private sector or the public sector, there are a number of vehicles available to them. As I indicated, the Individual Rights Protection Act is one, the Ombudsman is another, and direct appeals to ministers and departments is a third. I certainly will take the members' advice under consideration, Mr. Speaker, but not in the sense that it would be admitting that there is not ongoing action to deal with this issue. It's not only visible minorities, Mr. Speaker, or people from the ethnic community. It has to do with women and other issues. I believe that there are a number of programs and a number of ministers who are dealing with this issue on an ongoing basis. So, but I must say, I appreciate the honourable member bringing the matter to the attention of the government. I'm pleased to see that he has a like concern.
Calgary-Buffalo supplementary.
Yes, we hear of perpetual reviews of this issue by the government, and I'm wondering whether the minister will undertake to implement some program similar to that of the employment equity program that the federal government has had in place for over a year now, so that we can have some indication that the government is going to do something about the problem.
Mr. Speaker, I can also tell the member for Calgary-Buffalo that I have had many discussions with people from the ethnic community on this issue, and I must say that there is not unanimity within the communities that this is the way to deal with the issue, that somehow a program is established to advance them through civil service and through the business community. You can't force this type of issues, Mr. Speaker, in a manner that deals with programs. You have to deal with it. You have to educate individuals. It's a very significant education process that must take place. And with regard to that education process, Mr. Speaker, we are in the department undertaking a direction, and certainly I will be consulting with my Immigration and Settlement Services Advisory Committee, who have just completed a province-wide review of all of the settlement agencies and who on a regular basis communicate with the ethnic communities in this province. I would just like to reiterate, Mr. Speaker, if there is a particular instance that is of concern to one of the individuals who raise it, and individuals are impeded in their advancement through the civil service as a result of their race or religion, I think it would be a very responsible act for them to bring it to the attention of the minister responsible.
Thank you. Member for Westlock Sturgeon, main question.
Mr. Speaker, the question today is to the Premier, Mr. Speaker. It's not since the 1930s have our farm population been so decimated by a combination of drought, and low prices, and most of all possibly the rapacious money lenders, not of the 1930s, but now the government is the most rapacious money lender, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, although, Mr. Speaker, the government has made some band-aid approaches in a way of talking about possibly reducing payments by the farmers commensurate with their income, and also a certain amount of leasebacks, these are still very small, Mr. Speaker, for the emergency that is out there. The first question to the Premier, Mr. Speaker, is with regard to the question of the Debt Review Board that has been reinstituted by this government, but it is a toothless tiger, Mr. Speaker. Would the Premier agree now to give the same powers to this Debt Review Board that the Debt Review Board had back in the 1930s? Just restore that kind of power to the Debt Review Board.
That's about 8 sentences. I beg your pardon, honourable member.
Mr. Speaker, I guess I shouldn't comment on the rudeness of the member, the way he addressed the chair. And if anybody thinks they're going to address the chair in this legislature in a rude way, they are going to have to fight with me. And just remember that. Just remember that. You can't bring your disgraceful manners. You can't bring...
Supplementary question.
I will take back the point of saying it is like hell and leave it to your reading to answer, but I would like the question answered.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, I reject completely the honourable member's analogy of that the current conditions in Alberta are in the rural areas are the same as the 1930s. I've traveled throughout Alberta. I speak to our farmers and ranchers. They feel very good about the assistance they are receiving. They feel very good about the tremendous lowering of input costs, the lowering of input costs on money, the lowering of input costs on energy, the price of gasoline, the lowering of input costs on fertilizer, the lowering of input costs on insurance and stabilization programs. They're very pleased with the strength in the meat sector of our agricultural community. They really are looking forward with great anticipation to the new free trade agreement with the United States. Our farmers are not negative like the honourable member. Our farmers are ready to compete. They appreciate the support they're getting, and they're going to compete. Agriculture is strengthening. Our grain sector is strengthening every day. The meat sector is strong, and we're going to help them to be a very strong part of this province's growth in the future.
Mr. Speaker, in view of the fact that all these privileges are no good to a farmer that's forced off the land, what is the ministry or what is the Premier going to do to stop the wholesale forcing off the land by the different financial institutions, including his own Agricultural Development Corporation?
Mr. Speaker, there isn't a wholesale forcing off of the land. Again, that's the kind of negative type of thing that the honourable member wants to introduce in this legislature. if he wants to hurt agriculture, and if he wants to scare people out of lending money in agriculture, it's to continue to paint such a negative image of Alberta's agriculture. That's the way to stop people lending money in this province, and it's his type of stories and the type of stories we hear from the other party in the opposition. If they're positive, and if we're working with our agriculture people, and we're working with the financial institutions, and in our ADC, we are making sure they treat every borrower with extreme flexibility, and we're going to continue to work with farmers and ranchers to build this sector of our economy.
Mr. Speaker, the flexibility consists of whether you get off the land tomorrow or you get it off next month. The question is here, Mr. Speaker, will not the Premier at least look at this act that was drafted in the 1930s? It worked in Alberta and Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. Will he not at least look at that act and see if he can't reinstitute it today?
As I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, this is not the 1930s. And one thing for sure that's going to be happening with people all over the world who are wanting to come and invest in Alberta or lend money in Alberta is that they will have a very negative thought about doing that if we keep hearing this crying from the opposition and putting down Alberta's farmers and ranchers the way they do. Because our farmers and ranchers are adapting, and they are strengthening, and they're growing. Now, the fact of the matter is the Associate Minister of Agriculture is looking at every option to help our farmers and ranchers, who some do have problems, obviously, in the debt area. But let's remember this, too. In every business in our country, there will always be some who will move out of that business or that sector of our economy. Government cannot provide everything to keep everybody always in the things they're doing. Some will leave.
Final supplementary.
The fact that governments are elected to protect their citizens from acts of nature and acts beyond their capacity, in this case drought and poor world prices. Would not the minister show, or would not the Premier show, Mr. Speaker, some of the leadership he showed in the area of disabled, for instance, and calling a conference of the people, calling a conference of farm leaders, but he as chair, and listen to them and what they would have to say about the debt catastrophe we have striking our farms today?
Again, Mr. Speaker, we are meeting with farm leaders every day. The Minister of Agriculture and the Associate Minister of Agriculture are meeting with farm leaders every day. My responsibility as Chairman of the Agriculture and Rural Economy Committee of Cabinet, I am meeting with farm leaders. And we are working with them, and they do appreciate it. And we're going to make it happen that this agriculture industry is not just stabilized, but is strengthening in the future. And I refuse to accept the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party's position that Alberta's farmers and ranchers cannot compete and that they can't handle the problems that they're facing right now with the assistance of the government.
Cypress Redcliffe, Stony Plain and Vegreville.
Thank you. I'd like to ask a supplementary question to the Associate Minister of Agriculture to let some sunshine through that socialist overcast of doom and gloom. Given that some 7 out of 100 Alberta farmers who deal with ADC are financially stressed, would the Associate Minister of Agriculture please confirm reports that some 3,000 ADC borrowers are prepaid, which exceeds the number of ADC borrowers who are in arrears?
Mr. Speaker, I'd be pleased to confirm that there are over 3,000 borrowers who have prepaid in the amount of over $5 million. I'd also like to indicate to the member from West Loch Sturgeon that the Debt Review Board has been working very well. The farmers that I've... Baloney. You know, communication is the key to working out a lot of these difficult financial situations, not legislation. It took us 30 years after the 30s to get the lending community back into agriculture because of the harm that debt legislation that you're talking about caused to agriculture. Mr. Speaker, one of the things that we have to be very, very careful to do in assessing the options and opportunities that we're having in dealing with the stressed accounts in agriculture is to ensure that we don't dry up the operating capital that the other 83 farmers out of 100 in this province have access to.
Vermilion, Viking, and Little Bow.
Mr. Speaker, with respect, negativity doesn't help, but neither does pretending to be Pollyanna when dealing with some very serious situations. The government's own statistics, Mr. Speaker, indicate that 92,000 rural Albertans will be gone by the year 2001, and I'm wondering if the Premier is not prepared, recognizing the seriousness of that statistic, to initiate some new, innovative, and immediate action to address the debt crisis in rural Alberta.
We are, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Little Bow.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Associate Minister. As of the last few days, the Minister has indicated in the House that some new policy with regards to ADC in terms of flexibility would be announced. Also, I understand maybe possibly out of the House some announcements were made. Could the Minister indicate the timing of the next announcement?
Mr. Speaker, we're doing reviews on an ongoing basis of the agricultural situation. We've looked at 38 different options and policies, and frankly, there hasn't been no announcement either in the House or out of the House at this point in time, because we're still reviewing those in terms of flexibility and in terms of really trying to meet the needs of the farm that still may have some viability.
Member for Little Bow, followed by Lloydminster, and then Edmonton Calder.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Attorney General, and it refers to the latest report, the 50th report of the Institute of Law Research and Reform. Out of the last 15 reports since 1982, the government has only accepted a partial part of the recommendations. My question to the Minister is, could the Minister indicate why that has happened and what the Minister intends to do with the current report?
Mr. Speaker, the Institute of Law Research and Reform has performed some valuable studies. In the last session of the legislature, 2 of their reports had implementation of some of the recommendations were contained in them. We take them under advisement. We are hopeful that some legislation will come forward during the course of the current legislation, which will reflect some of the recommendations in the report, and the honourable member will have to just wait and see which pieces of legislation will be forthcoming. Obviously, we can't accept all the recommendations, but we do appreciate the work that they have done, and we'll continue to consider those carefully.
Mr. Speaker, possibly could the Minister indicate in terms of this recent report which ones of the recommendations will be brought to the House? Some indication of which ones will receive his priority?
Well, legislation is currently under consideration with respect to certain of those recommendations, and when the time is right for legislation to be filed, I will be notifying the Assembly of those decisions.
Mr. Speaker, to the Attorney General, could the Attorney General indicate whether the report will be referred to the Law and Regulations Committee? I understand that is part of the process. Will that occur in this instance?
Mr. Speaker, that particular course of action was undertaken within the last legislature, and that report was made available to me when I became Attorney General, and I've considered that report and the recommendations of that particular committee of the Assembly in terms of forming priorities for legislation that might be appropriate, receiving government approval. And I have not yet concluded that it would be useful to repeat that exercise.
Edmonton Meadowlark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wonder if the Minister could tell us whether he is considering implementing reforms to the legal aid system, allowing for greater funding and greater choice of lawyers.
Well, the honourable member will appreciate that the estimates of the Department of the Attorney General have been before the Assembly and have showed an increase in the funding for legal aid in this year's budget to make sure that the funding requests, as requested by the Legal Aid Society of Alberta, are provided for. And we think that's appropriate at this stage in view of the current situation. There's been a substantial increase in the budgeted funds, and we will continue to meet carefully with the Legal Aid Society, and we do approve, I must say, of the current makeup of the Legal Aid Society and the volunteer role that's played by lawyers in this province in providing those services to the public.
Member for Edmonton Supplementary, Edmonton Strathcona.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the mandate for the use of the extra legal aid funds, will the Attorney General undertake that on civil legal aid there be more flexibility in the way of contribution so that the legal aid can creep up to those who are above the threshold in assets but cannot foot the whole bill?
Well, I appreciate the concern of the honourable member for Strathcona on that issue, and I would want to consult very carefully with the officials of the Legal Aid Society relative to that particular question. It really comes down to the question of access to the legal system in Canada, and as I indicated during the course of my estimates, that that is a matter which we intend to address in a very serious way, not just here in Alberta, but in Canada as a result of discussions that are taking place amongst all provinces and the federal government. And as I indicated in my estimates, I will be taking part in a very important conference in June of this year in Toronto on the subject of access for Canadians to the legal system. And we hope that coming from that conference, we will have several new initiatives to deal with not just the issue raised by the honourable member for Strathcona today, but the many other impediments that exist now to Canadians having the opportunity to go not just before the courts, but before administrative tribunals and so on. I know that goes beyond the text or the concern raised in the supplementary, but I want to assure the House that that is a very real concern of this government.
Member for Lloydminster, followed by Edmonton Calder, followed by Edmonton Gold Bar, Tabor Warner, Edmonton Strathcona, Vermilion Viking, Edmonton Avonmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is to the Premier. The Husky upgrader has been in the news one way or another over the past 4 years. My question is, has there been any recent discussions with the federal and Saskatchewan governments plus Husky regarding the go-ahead of this very important project?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I have been discussing on a daily basis, along with my colleague, the Minister of Energy. I've been discussing it with the Premier of Saskatchewan, the other premiers, support the other day from Premier Barassa, but I've been talking also with the Prime Minister. I've been talking to the Deputy Prime Minister. I've been talking to the Chairman of the Board of Husky, other companies who might participate in this upgrader, and we are doing everything possible to make it a reality. I think, Mr. Speaker, it is so important to this province that that huge, heavy oil resource which we have has the additional flexibility, not just be sold as heavy oil, but to be sold perhaps as heavy oil, but also upgraded into light oil so that it can command a market anywhere in the world. And that's a tremendous resource. We are diversifying this economy, and we are also bringing the economy, strengthening it back, bringing the economy back. But I think, Mr. Speaker, it's extremely important, and I'm going to fight every minute of every day to get an upgrader in this area of Lloydminster so that we can have that resource upgraded, and I'm determined to see that project go ahead.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. I understand with the news that has been coming out in the past year that Husky also must go to the private sector, Mr. Premier, and I would like to know if they have a partner with them at this time, or if they are negotiating with the private sector.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Husky represent a large private sector corporation, of course, themselves, but in my discussions with them, I am aware that they are talking with other companies to participate in this project, and I have been as well. Because of the importance, as I've outlined to the House in my previous answer, the importance of this project, we are doing everything possible to have it proceed. And our government is prepared, either through loans or guarantees or equity participation in this project, to see that it goes ahead. We are confident of the resource, and we're confident of the future of this province. And we're prepared to use all the financial muscle available to us to see that this project goes.
Supplementary to the Premier. Mr. Premier, is there a timeline at this time where we might have a start-up time, or is that jumping the gun a little bit?
I'd say it's, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the interest of the honourable member, and I acknowledge here in the House to his colleagues that he has been working very hard on behalf of his constituency to see that this project proceeds. We've been working as well with the MLA and ministers from Saskatchewan and the Premier of Saskatchewan. I must say that we, as the member pointed out, this has been talked about for some period of time, and we do not want to have any more talk. We want now to have a decision. We want to be able to get everybody together, if we have to lock them in a room, and come out with a decision to have this project go ahead. And I'm going to, in the next several days and weeks, force people into the same room and try and get a decision on this, a positive decision. We want this project to go.
Calgary Falls, Forest Lawn, followed by Westlock Sturgeon.
Forest Lawn, do you think?
Yeah.
Mr. Speaker, I'm really pleased to hear that the Premier considers this project to be very important and that the province is prepared to put up loan and perhaps even equity guarantees to support the project. I wondered if he can tell us what his federal cousins are prepared to do by way of providing either loans or equity capital to make sure that this project goes ahead.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't speak for the federal government, obviously, but there's no question that in my discussions with the federal government and with the Saskatchewan government, they are prepared, along with us, to assist this project. I have to say, in the legislature here, I'm extremely pleased by the position of the Deputy Prime Minister, Don Mazankowski, of the commitment he is making to this project, the work he's doing. I'm extremely pleased that the Prime Minister, in my discussions with him, is taking an active role as well. Now, if we have the Premier of Saskatchewan, the Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister, the Premier of Alberta, and the Chairman of boards of companies, if we want to do this, I'll be extremely disappointed if we can get together and work on this decision. I'll be extremely disappointed if we can't make it happen. Our government's determined to make it happen.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Sure, and because I share the view of many that this may have become technologically obsolescent, like our ethylene plants. Could the Premier take one last look at the economics of the idea of one huge upgrader instead of many small upgraders, which are now taking the scene around the world, and possibly we are dancing to a tune that quit playing in 1980. Would the Premier take one more look at the economics? And if it's not, he's not trying to force water to run uphill here.
I might say, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member continues to express his negative views, and now against the upgrader as well. Frankly, I don't share his negative views, and this won't be the only upgrader that will be built in this province. of our kind of confidence in the future of this province and the future of that resource, there will be this upgrader, and it's not a small upgrader, and there will be other upgraders, and we're going to continue to work to have them happen in this province and in the Lloydminster area, and the one we're talking about is just in Lloydminster area and just on the other side of the border, but it impacts in our Lloydminster area and throughout Alberta. I must say, Mr. Speaker, we are not going to allow other people to build upgraders and ship the heavy oil to those upgraders in some other part of the world, in the United States, or Eastern Canada. We are going to make those jobs happen here. We're not shipping jobs down the pipeline the way he might.
Edmonton Calder.
Mr. Speaker, my questions are to the Minister of Social Services. This province has the lowest standards in Canada in not requiring training for its childcare workers. The Minister has indicated for the last 2 years that the matter is under advisement and discussion. The Alberta Advisory Council on Women's Issues called for training standards as their first recommendation in their recent report.
Count that high.
Question to the Minister. Can the Minister tell this Assembly when she will take action and require childcare workers to be trained in this province?
Mr. Speaker, this question has been addressed in the House on several occasions, and I appreciated the debate of the bill that the honourable member for Strathcona brought forth yesterday. It gave an opportunity for many members to express an opinion. But as I have indicated publicly, first of all, I was waiting for the federal government to come down with their position with respect to childcare policy overall. That position had been delayed for more than a year, and so unfortunately so was ours. And as I have said publicly, I will be in a position early this summer to communicate Alberta's view in terms of the specific regulations governing Alberta policy.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the other provinces haven't waited for the federal government. Supplementary to the Minister, would the Minister explain to this Assembly why we require training for workers working with children over 4.5 years old, but not working with children under 4.5 years old, in view of the fact that this is their most crucial time of development?
Mr. Speaker, I think that historically there has been several different views with respect to the type of care and nurturing for children under the age that the honourable member mentions. And this has been a matter of discussion for a great period of time. And with respect to waiting for the federal government and the honourable member's comment about other provinces, Mr. Speaker, indeed, on many occasions, Alberta has a different view than other provinces, and that doesn't mean that we don't take into consideration what they are doing. But it is also important for families, parents, and the daycare operators themselves to have an understanding of what overall policy would be. And I don't think it's fair to them to present a number of things that will impact on them several months apart. It had been my hope that we would be able to present an overall policy.
Well, supplementary to the Minister, in view of the fact that trained childcare workers are made aware of many issues, including the merits of various methods of discipline, how can the Minister ensure that untrained workers, childcare workers, are not resorting to corporal punishment due to their lack of knowledge about alternatives?
Mr. Speaker, it has certainly come to my attention that on a number of occasions where daycare operators have communicated with me about the vigilance and, in their view, the over-vigilance with respect to those who monitor the daycare situations on behalf of the department, leaving aside the very good work done by the Social Care Facilities Review Committee. A number of operators have indicated that their methods of discipline, if that's a good choice of words here, in terms of handling what may be inappropriate conduct by little people, aren't always agreed with. And as a matter of fact, I think that the honourable member would find that the monitoring done by the department is very vigilant in that regard.
Time for question period has expired. Might we complete this? Have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Edmonton Calder, final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister once again, as this province will be the big winner under the new federal daycare program, which you've already mentioned, because it will provide funding for commercial daycare centres, will the minister make a commitment then to use that extra money to subsidize wages for childcare workers, trained childcare workers in nonprofit centres?
Mr. Speaker, it is not our intention to set the wages for child care workers. That certainly is an area. The fee charged to families for child care is open for the operators to set, and based on that, certainly they should be able to pay their workers a decent wage, and that is up to the operators, absolutely.
Cypress Redcliffe.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the minister. I wonder if the minister would consider using the funds that would be saved to assist those who don't have access to daycare, either in the rural areas or in small towns, who either have to pay for childcare, or others who stay home and look after their children.
Mr. Speaker, that's a very timely question, because certainly we get many representations from families who are raising their own children and feel that they have a very heavy obligation by way of their taxes in subsidizing people regardless of the income that they have. I think it's important to note, Mr. Speaker, that first of all, whatever funds flow from the federal government, and we don't have an indication at this time how much that they will be, they are still Albertans' taxpayers' funds. It is not as if there is a magic pot of money somewhere else coming from other people that are going to go into childcare. So it's important for us to take the funds, whatever is made available, and share them as fairly as possible.
Edmonton Meadowlark.
Mr. Speaker, to the minister, has the minister undertaken an evaluation of current daycare worker training programs available through post-secondary education institutions to determine the applicability of the curriculum to current day requirements for daycare workers, and also to assess the accessibility of these programs for workers already employed and not earning a great deal of money to afford these programs?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we have done that.
Thank you. Orders of the day.